Let's wrap up our talk of protists in chapter 28 with concept 28.7. Protists play key roles in ecological communities. I do want you to keep in mind that throughout this entire chapter, because this group that we are informally calling protists is so gray and up in the air, that I don't want to focus on a lot of the tiny details. Focus on concept 28.1 and concept 28.7, some of the basics about the protist group, so you have an understanding of what protists are and how they fit into the overall taxonomic and phylogenetic tree of all living things. Know that they are part of the group Eukarya, know that they are usually unicellular, that type of thing. So try to think of some of the more common examples like the red and green algae and the slime molds and some of the ones that I've highlighted. Again, use the fact that I've highlighted certain examples and the fact that I laid out that Nintendo star on certain slides. Those are the ones that I feel like you should perhaps know as examples of the various types of this particular group of creatures that we're looking at. So concept 28.7 talks about how important protists are and the fact that they're found in diverse aquatic environments. They're almost always found in water or water areas. You will find them pretty much wherever you will find water, whether that is lakes, streams, puddles, oceans, inside your body, in damp soil, you name it, you're probably going to find some version of a protist. Protists often play the role of a symbiont or a producer. So we'll talk briefly about what those two roles are. The first one is a symbiont or a symbiotic role. Many protists have these relationships with a host. Oftentimes it's a mutualistic relationship to where they both benefit. Remember we talked about the dinoflagellates. The dinoflagellates were the little round BB-shaped protists that we talked about early on, and we said they were responsible for the red tide that can cause illness and death in some fish. Well, the dinoflagellates oftentimes form a symbiotic relationship with coral polyps that build the reefs. So the dinoflagellates oftentimes work hand in hand with coral, and they both benefit from that relationship. Another good example of a protist having a mutualistic relationship is the protists that live inside the gut of termites. Termites themselves can't digest cellulose. What digests the cellulose is the various protists and bacteria and creatures that live inside their guts. So the protist gets a nice environment to live in and gets food, and the bug, the termite, gets the nutrition that comes from the cellulose that it couldn't otherwise digest. Here's an amazing photo, microscope photo, of a symbiotic protist that lives in the gut of termites and digests cellulose, which is the wood fiber. We know that it's not all happy, mutual, beneficial relationships. Some of these protists are parasitic, like we talked about the plasmodium here that causes malaria. Some of them say there's a particular type of dinoflagellate that causes fish kills. Remember I talked about the red tide. And then here's one, Phytophthora. Phytophthora is a whole group of protists that cause all sorts of diseases and problems in plants. This particular Phytophthora that we're looking at causes sudden oak death, and you look at this entire forest and see how it's being wiped out, all the dead trees in there. So Phytophthora is a whole group of protists that attack everything from rose bushes to almond trees to fruit trees to oak trees, and causes disease and death in those trees. So some protists are beneficial, and some of them of course can be harmful. On the plus side, a lot of protists are photosynthetic, and they are important producers. They obtain energy from the sun, they go through photosynthesis, and they are the basis for a number of food chains, particularly in aquatic environments. They are the main, photosynthetic protists and prokaryotes are the main producers in aquatic environments. And there are some various plants that live in the waters and the oceans, but by far it's photosynthetic protists and the various prokaryotes that we've already talked about that are the main producers in those water environments. They are responsible for about 50% of all of the photosynthesis that occurs on the earth, and the other 50% would be up to the grass and the trees and the land plants and that type of thing. In aquatic environments, photosynthetic protists are limited by nutrients. So what keeps them in check usually is, do they have enough food? Do they have enough nutrients? Sometimes you'll have these huge population explosions when the limited nutrients that usually keeps them in check, when that limitation is taken away. This is usually accidental. Oftentimes it's human-related activity. Think about things like fertilizer runoff. We use all sorts of fertilizers in agriculture, and if there's a big rain and a lot of that fertilizer runs off into a stream, into a river, into the ocean, you can have these sudden population booms of these photosynthetic protists, and that's not always a good thing. That can cause unbalancing and cause problems. So in aquatic environments, there's kind of a good balance if we don't interfere, but a lot of times our activities upset that balance. It's pretty amazing to think that these tiny little creatures that we never think of, these protists, and then of course the other creatures we talked about, the prokaryotes like the bacteria and the archaea, they are such a huge part of our food chain. They're such a huge part of the life on our planet, but we never think about them because they're even too small for the most part for us to even see. But these various protists are basically the backbone of food chains in the oceans in particular, and without them we wouldn't have killer whales and seals and dolphins and tuna fish and things like that, because those guys are at the top of the chain, but it takes all these tiny little creatures at the bottom of the chain to feed the middle creatures like shrimp and fish and penguins to move on up to the top. So these protists, these tiny little microscopic creatures, in many cases, they are the ones that form the foundation of a lot of important food chains. Last but not least, we need to talk a little bit about human activity. Oftentimes we have an impact on the environment, not always good. Global warming is a good example. By far and away, the vast majority of scientists who spend their lives studying climate and climate change will tell you that number one, global warming is certainly a fact, and that number two, that humans are the main cause of the global warming that we see recently. So even if humans are not the cause, the fact that the climate is changing is a demonstrable fact. So how does this affect the various creatures that we've been talking about? Well, when the global temperatures change, when ocean water temperatures rise, the biomass of photosynthetic protists declines as the sea surface temperature has increased. What happens is, as the upper waters get warmer, there's a greater temperature difference between the cold water below and the warm water on top. And when you have too great of a difference, you don't get a lot of good mixing. And what you need is mixing to occur, because that pulls up nutrients that have floated down or sunk down toward the bottom. So you want these nutrients pulled up from the cold lower waters, and you want that to be brought up to where the light is toward the warmer upper waters. When you don't have a lot of good mixing, you have problems and you have unbalanced the ecosystem. And rising sea surface temperatures have done that, because the warmer waters don't mix well with the colder waters because there's such a temperature difference. So if this continues to happen, we have to think about what will be the effects on marine ecosystems and fishery yields and the global carbon cycle. It's all kind of balanced together. You can't really look at just one part of it because it's all interconnected. And this map kind of shows you what we're talking about. SST stands for sea surface temperatures, and in the areas where there is high sea surface temperatures, there's less mixing between the lower colder waters and the upper warmer waters, and that causes a slowdown in the growth of these various protists and phytoplankton that we're talking about. So just one more thing to keep in mind as we talk about humans and their impact on the environment. It's again amazing to talk about these little protist creatures, how they are in many cases very closely related to you and I, but it's an entire world of life that we just don't really think about. We're going to stop right there. That's chapter 28. Again, focus on the main details, focus on the parts that I've highlighted, the parts that I starred with the little Nintendo star, and you can safely sort of ignore the rest, because I don't want you to get bogged down in the entire chapter looking at every example of every possible little protist, because you drive yourself crazy. You can spend an entire 2 semesters studying nothing but protists, and we don't have time for that. So if you have any questions, let me know. I'll see you online. Good luck. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.